Hey guys, it's me, EODGamer here, and in this video, we're going to be doing a Lightcone comparison for Seele for 4 Lightcones, her signature in the night, super in position 1, and we're going to compare 3 other ones, the free-to-play cruising in the Stellar Sea. This one is of course going to be a super in position 5 Lightcone because it's a free-to-play one, and the 4-star, I know it's gacha, but we're going to see them both at their max potential, which is Swordplay at super in position 5, and the other one that I have in mind will be Only Silence Remains. This one is also going to be at super in position 5 as well. Now the tricky thing about this test is because a lot of Huynh Lightcones give crit rate, and crit rate, if you just put it on the character and don't convert it to crit damage, is a little bit trickier to figure out. So of course we need to tweak our build. Now you notice that my crit rate here is like 50 to 171 with my default build. So how I'm going to do it is I'm actually going to switch my build from like a crit damage crit rate, and I'm going to switch and put on like a crit rate one, and we'll slowly adjust the crit damage higher by using like certain items or some other characters with broken kill on the field so that we can get it up and reflect accurately this amounts of crit rate. For those of you who don't care about the nitty gritty, just take a look at the numbers. I think you'll find it a lot of value. If you're interested, I put all the timestamp in the certain section below, so take a look for the ones that you're interested. Let's start off with, of course, with the best one. Everyone has this one, so let's start off with it. Cruising in the Stellar Sea, 5-star super in position 5 free Lightcone that you can get from the Herta shop. This one gives you 16% crit rate, and if the enemy has less than 50% HP, you get an extra 16% crit rate. And of course, we have to defeat an enemy so that we get this 40% buff, and we want to see how that actually makes a difference. For the sake of simplicity, when we are comparing this together with In the Night, I am not going to factor in the additional amount. Of course, when you drop below 50%, this additional crit rate of 16%. I'm just going to take into account this 16%, which is more or less equivalent to what we see here, 18%. What I really need to account for is this ability when you defeat the enemy. So that is just something to point out. Of course, if you are super min-maxing, this one could be a big factor. But for me, I think I want to see it at 100%, a bit of damage comparison. So let's take a look. This is Cruising the Stellar Sea. Let's see some damage numbers. Okay, one thing that we need to know is we have to defeat a monster, and I'm just going to use her E, try to beat one of these ads down. So she has a resurgent buff, but we don't want to care too much about this resurgence buff. The one that we want is this attack boost 40%. So I'm going to just get rid of this resurgence buff just by simply smacking. Let's just smack this guy once. Okay, now that it's gone, I'm going to simply just use my ult and burst the boss. So this will account for the buff from Cruising the Stellar Sea, this 40% damage bonus. My Pailu of course doesn't do anything. She is not holding any significant buff for the team, not holding any broken kills, so she's just here just in case she dies to make my testing a bit easier for transparency purposes. So smack. So about 47,000 based on Cruising the Stellar Sea. Now let's get back out, and I want to see some damage numbers with of course her signature Lightcone now. So I'll go back into the character screen, go to Lightcones here and switch over to In the Night. So the key thing about In the Night, the 18% is more or less similar to Cruising in the Stellar Sea, it's like 2% apart. But the one that we really want to focus on is this second part here. Long story short is it caps off at 160 speed, and she gets basic attack bonus, skill damage increase, and crit damage of ultimate increase by 12%. So this is like somewhere around 72% ultimate crit damage increase, which is the one that we're going to be checking out. But of course it increases everything of her overall kit. The key is of course to get her real fast. She needs to go as high as she can to 160 speed. You see here my build is like 144, so we need to use her skill once to get that speed buff, and it will more or less top off at 160 real quick. So I'm just going back in here. Let's just smack the boss again and see some damage numbers. So I have to press E because this is the one that gives her the speed buff. You can see down here after I cast it. You can see some speed buff here. He's gonna do some deep freeze to slow her down. Okay, so I'm just gonna go ahead, smack it once. How fast is she right now? So it's still under. Because I have her at E6, so my speed buff stacks twice. So I'm just gonna press E real quick and stack it a second time. So she has an ult ready, and I'm going to hit and press the ult right now, and let's just check some of the figures again. You can see here I have it at 188, which is significantly higher, so I get the entire bonus from of course the Lightcone here, which is 72% crit damage buff. So previously it was like 47. Let's see how much damage it is now. Okay, so about 54,000 damage. Let's retreat, get back. Okay, so we've seen some numbers. Let's just talk real quick about the In the Night versus Cruising the Stellar Sea, since I think this is most likely the free-to-play versus any of you who are thinking of converting over. It was a 7,000 difference, of course, on the base of 47, so that's about a 15% damage increase to In the Night. This is, of course, only just factoring ultimate damage. This attack percentage, we are factoring it after she defeats the enemy, which is a very conditional one because that's at the best of Cruising in the Stellar Sea. While In the Night is really like very consistent, as long as your speed is higher, you get this buff like almost 100% of time. This one was very conditional, like it required us to defeat a target in order to have the attack increase. So without it, I think it's going to be significantly lower. And let's check it out now again, because we want to exactly know like what is the average is going to be. So when we know the best case situation for Cruising the Stellar Sea is roughly around 15% damage increase, let's look at something that is more practical. And for this, of course, I'm going to just pump some food here to get her energy up max. I don't think we have time to waste to watch her regenerate everything. So I'm just going to give her food twice, max energy. Okay, so now no buff at all. Let's just go in, press here, smack the boss. So that's like a 39,000 damage. Let's back off quick and let's do some calculations again. Okay, and so what did we see from that test? Very quickly, we noticed that the difference between In the Night versus Cruising in the Stellar Sea roughly is between 15% better to even 35% better if we just take it as the most recent test, the one without any buffs at all. Of course, the reason why there's a range is because Cruising in the Stellar Sea has this additional 40% when you beat a target of attack percentage bonus increase. There's a lot of things that we haven't factored in. For example, if you have attack buffers in your team, there might be diminishing return which lowers that 15% to even worse. Maybe it becomes like 20-25 because of the diminishing returns of attack percentage increase. Of course, in its to make it like a bit more fair, we didn't factor in this extra 16% crit rate when the enemy is below 50%, because this ultimately is about 32% crit damage. But I don't think a lot of us will be running at, for example, not at the max just to utilize this ability. I think In the Night also, the one thing that is not factored in is its consistency. This one has its ups and downs, so you do have to time that right. This one is just pretty much if your speed is above 160, you get the full buff regardless of what you do here and there. So I do think it's definitely a lot better. It's definitely worth it. In my opinion, maybe a fair gauge should be somewhere between 20 to 25% better, which is pretty significant considering this is a pretty decent Lightcone already Cruising in the Stellar Sea. A lot of crit rate that you can give to your entire team. So now that aside, now they have compared the two 5 stars, I think another Lightcone that a lot of people are thinking of is Swordplay. This is an interesting one. It doesn't have, unfortunately, it doesn't have any any crit rate. We're gonna just test it out. We assume that it has this crit rate here, this 18% crit rate. So what I'm gonna do is I'm just gonna very simply just switch to it and smack the boss up to 5 times so we can see how much it gets, and of course see some numbers as well. Just remember, previously when we tested, it was roughly around like 55,000 out. So let's see whether there's anything different now. So we're going to press E, smack the boss. So you can see we get 4 stacks here. We just need to hit one more time to get the max stacks. Okay, one more. Okay, so now we had 5 buffs. So the effect here is like it stacks 5 times at super imposition 5 to 16% multiplied, so it's like 80% damage buff here based on this Lightcone buff. Now we're just going to see the damage. I'm going to just use the alt, hit the boss real quick. These are the stats that I have. We want to see some numbers. Okay, now let's back off real quick. So we saw the numbers now. With this one was like 50k at its max stacks, and of course if we switch over to the In the Night, this one was like roughly around 55k. A 10% increase, but it definitely doesn't factor in this first part of the crit rate 18%, which means this one is technically this one has like an advantage of 32% crit damage because it doesn't factor in this one. So we're going to come back here and I'm going to actually do some tweaking. What I'm going to do is actually putting in 3 characters with broken kill. So 1 DPS here obviously doesn't buff the team. We get crit damage 10%, crit damage 10% here, and Pailu, I just equipped her with broken kill, so it's 10% crit damage here to make up basically for the 30% difference. We will see it in the game as well. So let's go back in. I know it's very weird why we're having so many DPS characters, but that is the main reason why. Alright, so let's just take a look at the screen. We can see here she has 188. There are no other buffs on her, but her crit damage here is much higher. 30% higher because of these 3 characters now having broken kill, which makes up a bit for the difference. So let me just use my ultimate on Seele, and we're gonna burst the boss. So about 60k, so it's, let's just go back into the character screen and let's talk about it. Okay, so what did the test show us? 60k for In the Night, once we factor in like the crit damage increase, because this one doesn't have that crit rate. Swordplay gave us like 50k damage at its max stacks. So in the Night, about 10% better, or 20% rather, 20% because it's like 60 versus 50, 20% better for In the Night versus Swordplay. And one thing to note is, of course, this is a lot more consistent. You just need your speed to be a certain amount. This of course requires you to hit the same target, and if you're trying to like proc Resurgence, it might not be as fluid as well in her gameplay, so that is something to consider. But other than that, a pretty strong showing for Swordplay. It is a bit more consistent if you're hitting the same target. Cruising in the Stellar Sea offers a wider range, and that compares the 2 of them as well. You can just extrapolate the numbers. The last one I think a lot of people might be thinking of will be Only Silence Remains. This one is an interesting one because you get a lot of consistency here with this wearer's attack increase by 32%, which is basically this effect here that we can see on this part here. But not only that, is if you have 2 enemies or fewer, you do get a bit of crit rate here, 24%. So roughly I would say it's quite equivalent to this 18%, and we don't have to factor that in. So what I'm going to do, because this is like still 6% higher, I'm going to leave Bailu with the broken kill, so you get 10% from there. So now I'm just going to show you, I'm just going to remove the characters here. Only Bailu now has broken kill, so that is like 10% higher to slap onto her. And the previous number in the original test was like 55k, so I think we will use that as a benchmark to test 55k versus what we see here for Only Silence Remains. Okay, and because the Lightcone here doesn't really have any effect if there's 2 or fewer enemies, it's just crit rate. As long as I ensure the screenshot at the end is a crit damage number, then of course we factored this part in already. This is just a universal 32%. I'm just going to go ahead and ulti the boss and pray that it crits. Okay, so about 45,000, let's back off real quick. And we can see that out of all of them, definitely the worst option is Only Silence Remains. Even, for example, Cruising the Stellar Sea did show a much more attractive number. Of course, at its worst, it was like 39,000. This one was like consistent 45k. So this one gives you a bit more consistency. Only Silence Remains, but this one gives you a higher cap, especially if you can defeat enemies, which is in line with Seele's kit. So my ranking will be In the Night will be first. If you want consistency and there isn't like too many enemies, you're just hitting the same monster, more of like a traditional hunt character, you don't care about proccing Resurgence, Swordplay likely will be quite good on her, probably the second best. If you are looking for the best Lightcone for her overall kit that's free to play, I think Cruising in the Stellar Sea is more than enough. It gives you a bit of consistency, and especially when you defeat a target, you get the Resurgence buff, plus you get this additional attack buff. I think it's really solid as well. For Only Silence Remains, this is a decent alternative if you have another person that wants to use the free-to-play Lightcone. This gives her more consistency because it's just a straight-up 32% attack increase. But as we mentioned, 32% attack increase can easily be found from other characters in the game. For example, you run with any Harmony-like character, probably will give you the attack percentage as well. But anyways, those are my thoughts and honest ranking. Let me just switch back my thing real quick. And if you appreciate such content, this is done really for any of you guys who are planning for Lightcones in future. Check out my Seele build guide and other guides on the channel. I think you will find it really helpful. And thank you so much for watching. See you in the next video.